All right, and I think we are good. So, Susie, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks so much. And I should be screen sharing. And let me minimize things so I can see everything. Let's see. All right. Just trying to get my screen set up. Perfect. All right. So hopefully everyone is able to see and hear well. Hi, I'm Susie Bruce. I'm director of the Gordie Center at the University of Virginia. And I'm really honored to have been asked to present we did a three-part session with IHEC this year. We did alcohol, the role of alcohol in hazing. We talked about alcohol, cannabis, and athletic performance. And then this is our third and final one for this year on social norms basics. So when I worked with the team about what folks are interested in, it was sort of we just kind of want a little bit of a social norms 101. So we only have an hour. So that would be a lot packed in. So I'm going to do a little bit of social norms 101. I'm going to kind of focus on how we partner with students and give you lots and lots of ideas, hopefully for your own campaigns, regardless of where you are. If you've never done one and you're thinking about it, or you've done a lot, and you're just looking for some new ideas, hopefully you will gain something. Please use the chat. We are a small group, so we can also just unmute. And there will be a couple of times where I ask you, we're going to have some bad flyers, and I'm going to be like, what's wrong? So at that point, please unmute and chime in with what you think the problems were. All right, so okay, there we go. I'm still learning to use Canva in a slide deck. So a little bit about who we are. We are named after Gordie Bailey, and Gordie died in 2004 as a result of an alcohol overdose related to fraternity hazing at the University of Colorado Boulder. We honor his memory. We're entrusted by his family. You see his mom and dad and his sister there. And so our national mission is to end hazing and substance misuse, and really expanding from college and high school students nationwide, which is why we're always honored to do these programs in other states. We serve our university as well as kind of a national mission. We have a lot. I got to do a little blurb because we have a lot of stuff that's free. So if you're not already using it, we would love for you to use the free stuff that we have on our website. We have short animated videos around alcohol and hazing topics. We have a ton of Instagram campaigns, including all the alt text. So you can use any of those as long as you don't alter, adapt them. If you want to put a slide in your Instagram campaign that talks about your local resources, feel free to do that. You just can't take our name off of it. That's all. And we also you can go to our YouTube channel. All of these, when you get that slide deck, those are all hyperlinks. So you'll be able to look at our toolkit, go to our YouTube, and then we also have a store. So if you're interested in purchasing some things, we also have a lot that are you can customize with your campus logos. If you want to put a QR code that takes people to your website, there's a lot that we can do. And those are kind of a fee for service on those. So moving into social norms marketing. Where does this fit in your campus approach? So it is an environmental strategy as opposed to an individual strategy. I hesitated putting this because people are going to be like, lower effectiveness. I don't want that, right? But when you look at college aim, there's definitely things that have no evidence of effectiveness or mixed results. What this just says is, yes, this is an evidence-informed strategy. And it's lower effectiveness, partly because environmental strategies can be really difficult to implement effectively and comprehensively. So, this, if you want, here's the hyperlink to college drinking, the college aim, and you can actually get the research. If this is something new that you're looking at doing and you want to make the case, those are some of the ideas. And I also wanted to note that there are other strategies in college aim using a social norms approach that have been rated either higher effectiveness, which is the highest level they rate, or moderate effectiveness. And those are kind of basics, like if you're familiar with the basics programs. So both electronic and mailed personalized normative feedback. So not just the in-person like basics, which is also higher effectiveness, but just mailing back that normative feedback. Here's how much you said you drink. Here's how you compare, or in-person kind of norms clarification. So it fits within a comprehensive campaign, and there is evidence of effectiveness. So when we look at prevention, you're going to hear me say comprehensive a whole lot because that's what we know works. You can't just do a series of flyers that have a social norms approach and expect that really to make a huge impact. You've got to look very comprehensively and we'll talk about that kind of at the end, what those might be. But social norms is theory driven. There are lots of approaches. You do have to train your staff. Unfortunately, I've heard many times over my career, like, oh, it's really not that hard to do social norms marketing. And I'm like, well, it's hard to do it well. And so that's what we're going to talk about today so that you feel maybe more informed, or if you've got staff you're trying to train and just understand. It's like anything where it takes a whole lot of work and the end result looks really simple and easy, but it does take a lot. You have to have enough of a dose. You have to have messages out in different ways to reach different people. What's the timing on it? We'll talk about hazardous events that may be happening on your campus and how you can do social norms within that. That cultural humility, how do we make sure we're speaking to all of our various audiences? And of course, you want to evaluate. So you're going to hear a lot of this in what works around social norms marketing. And I just want to put it in that framework of any kind of prevention. These are the things that'll help with success. And of course, this BIF, so strategic prevention framework, when we look at what you need to be doing, it's the same when I start talking about the process of creating a social norms marketing campaign. It's going to look really similar to this. We have 7 steps in the framework for social norms. So that's kind of the context and how to put social norms within your comprehensive campaigns and your efforts around prevention. So what's a little bit different about the social norms approach? The big thing here is really it focuses on perceptions. It is, any of us who have a cat, and I do have one who's banned from the room that I'm in right now, they sit in high places looking like they're going to get the deer that's walking by or the big dog, right? Because they have this perception they're much bigger. We need to focus on what do students think is happening. Who do they want to be? Like a first year student maybe doesn't care what other first years are doing because they're looking up. They're like, okay, what are the seniors doing? What is the typical, role model? So high school students are like, well, what's typical in college? They may not care as much. And it's important to start getting that information and understanding your population and what's important to them as you start to create a campaign. What do you notice when you see these pictures? My guess is when I do this live in front of a group of students, they're like the green pencil, the green goldfish, right? You notice what stands out, what's different. You're not noticing the, 48 pencils there, or the 5 goldfish that are the color you expect. We are hardwired to notice what is different. That's how we survived, in, the early stages of humanity, right? That was like, oh, deer, like bison. Okay. Oh, whoa, that's a saber-toothed tiger. I need to pay attention to that because that could hurt me. So we're really hardwired to notice the things that are different and not so much what is actually normal and typical. Our brains have amazing ability to kind of fill in the blanks. Now, if you look at that picture, take a moment. This is only a partial picture of something. But my guess is you're probably thinking, I have no idea what this is, right? Until I present it a different way, like this, right? Same information. We just took away the line that's, we put a line here, see? And when we erase it, our brain can fill it in. You're like, oh, that's like a 3-dimensional cube that maybe you drew a ton when you were in school, or maybe that's just me. We can fill in the gaps. We can make meaning. You can see like sentences where they take out the vowels and you can totally read it. It might take you a little bit longer, but our brains are really good at filling in gaps. What this means within social norms marketing is, or within student environments is, You go to a party and everyone's holding, their red cup, and you're like, everybody's wasted, right? What we don't know because we're not having these conversations is, this is from Virginia Commonwealth University. They're like, I've been drinking water. Like, you don't know. You fill in the gaps. You see a cup, you assume, oh, they must be drinking. They must be getting wasted. And you really don't know. So that's why it's really important to look at those perceptions, because once we understand some of the issues, we can start to fix things. It is well documented that there are misperceptions around a host of behaviors. It doesn't matter if it's sexual activity, if it's drinking, if it's other drug use, littering, cheating on your taxes. I mean, there's more and more research on this, but I'm just going to pick one, which is the number of drinks the last time a college student went out or socialized. When we ask students, how much did you have? On average, the mean is like 3.2 drinks. When we say, well, how much do you think the typical student drank the last time? The exact same question, just instead of what do you think, what does someone else? You can see there's a 2 drink increase. Well, if I think I'm being a wuss and only having 3, right? Most people are having 5. And I might even be thinking, well, I'm not that bad because other people are drinking more than me. That 2 drinks, that can be a lot if you look at weight, you look at if someone's been eating, all these other things. So this perception gap is really important to document and understand why that's important. So social norms theory really shows that we overestimate unhealthy behaviors, right? We may notice that difference, the goldfish, the pencil, not the pattern of what most people are doing. So we notice at the dining hall on, Sunday morning, at brunch, people are talking about this crazy party and people were like jumping off the balcony and it was insane. And we talk about that. We don't talk about how a majority of students probably were hanging out with friends, maybe in the library studying because midterms are coming up. Like, we don't talk about those things, so they don't get attention. The out of the ordinary gets the attention, and it makes it seem like that's what everyone's doing. And it makes it seem like that's the norm, that's the expectation. And we know that parents, buy into this, faculty buy into this. Um, the flip side is we underestimate the healthy behaviors because we're not counting them often. When we're focusing, we miss out. So we fill in like that cube, we fill in the missing meaning because we expect, right? Because of media, we hear the worst things. So we don't know how many students are alternating with water, are choosing not to drink at all, are choosing to be the designated driver and make sure their friends get home safely. So if we don't start counting those things in our surveys, people assume they're not happening. So social norms research has documented that these misperceptions, if we're not doing some kind of intervention, will get worse over time. They stop people discussing because if I'm thinking I'm not okay with the drinking culture, but everyone else seems okay, I have that misperception, then am I really going to speak up? Am I going to intervene with a friend? Because I'm afraid they're going to get mad at me because that's what everybody does. And it really does kind of saturate and permeate the culture. And we know that eventually, over time, we will make problems worse. Negative attitudes and behaviors will continue to increase. So I want to make sure we also have a good understanding of like why these things happen, because we can't create prevention programs without a good understanding of like what sort of the psychology is behind why people think and behave the way they do. So not to have a bunch of psychological big terms, but there's 2 I really want to make sure we have a sense of. And one is just pluralistic ignorance. And all that says is the majority of people think they're in the minority. So the majority of our college students are drinking in lower risk ways. Maybe they're drinking underage, but if we look at, are they getting to the hazardous drinking rates? Depending on your campus, you may have a majority that are drinking in lower risk ways or using protective behaviors. The problem is, like this little sheep here is like, I am the only person who has no clue what's happening. So most people have healthy behaviors, but they think they're in the minority, that most people have unhealthy behaviors. The flip side of that is false consensus. So the minority thinks they're the majority, right? So this can play out, say, in a student group where you've got a couple of really heavy drinkers and they think this is what everyone does. And they're really vocal about it. They're like, this is a party school. This is what everyone does. No one should criticize me. And they shut down discussion. So these two sides of a coin like can perpetuate these really unhealthy behaviors and perceptions. So they shut down conversation, especially because these folks tend to be pretty vocal. They're like waving the flag that their behaviors are just fine and no one needs to say anything. So, kind of to put this together, even if I'm not a drinker or I'm a low risk drinker, I don't want to get drunk, I might think everyone is getting drunk. That might encourage me to drink a little bit more, right? There's this like imaginary peer who's pressuring me, even if no one is directly saying something to me. Um, if we correct misperceptions, the research is pretty clear that healthy behaviors will increase. Now, one thing that's really important is you have to document that there's a misperception. I worked with a campus once that they had gotten a grant and they did a ton of research, all these survey data. And when they looked at their data of what was typical behaviors and what were perceptions, they matched. There was no perception gap. There wasn't that two drinks, imaginary peer. And we're like, well, maybe we go to the grant funder, which I was on that board, because it was going to be a waste of time and effort and was not going to make an impact because we were basically just going to say, here's exactly what you're doing, and it's what you think everyone is doing. So it's a really critical piece that sometimes gets missed. So misperceptions increase the tolerance for and engagement in those negative attitudes. And the most important thing, I think, is when sometimes people will say, well, we're showing these really unhealthy. We want them not to drink or not to be drinking, up to 5 drinks. Even if we're showing norms that are higher than we want, people still believe they're worse than they actually are. And it puts pressure on those students with moderate attitudes. So it keeps them from pushing back. It might increase their own drinking, right? And we know some research from West Perkins, who Perkins and Berkowitz are the ones who really identified this phenomenon and did the earliest research, that children of alcoholics are more vulnerable to perceived peer pressure. So we actually have a group for indicated prevention that are at higher risk if we're looking for additional reasons why we should look at the social norms approach. So what makes it a little bit different? It is, instead of being reactive, waiting for a problem, it's trying to find the good news, right? Being proactive. It is very outcomes based. There's a lot of research around it. We focus on perceptions, right? So what do people think? And how do we correct that? One of the biggest things is normal versus healthy, because when we think about 18 to 22-year-olds, right? I mean, yes, we have a healthier culture now than we did, say, 20 years ago. Everybody's drinking water and running. But one of the key things is that people want to be normal. Anybody who's got a teenager or remembers being a teenager, like, you want it to be normal more than anything. And what we're saying is it's normal to be healthy. It avoids some of the health terrorism, scare tactics of the past. And it is an environmental focus, which means we can have greater reach and a good use of our resources. So I did find this one. I've actually been using this for a while, so I know I'm speaking to folks. This is really old. I think I found the earliest version of this presentation that I gave from like 1998. So this is very old, but I think it's a good example of what we used to do, which was normalizing the unhealthy behavior, right? So here we've got, I mean, if you're looking at this and it's like, it's nice, please don't smoke, dare to be different. But like, yeah, it's a pretty little fish here, but it seems like you're not having any fun. Everyone else is doing stuff. So here's how you would turn that message into a social norms message, focusing on the positive, right? Again, it's normal to be healthy, right? Because the data at the time was, here's like 4 fish out of, this group. Most fish swim in this one way are like pretty healthy. So it's just a way of kind of flipping things around. if you look at the three, the levels of prevention, you can use social norms messages across any of those, whether it's what everyone is doing. You can look at a selected group like student athletes. You can look at students who've, with a substance use disorder completing treatment. So there's just a lot of ways you can use these kinds of messages. And as you're collecting data, to be aware that there's two different types of social norms. And again, I mentioned Perkins and Berkowitz really are the foundation of all these. I think I saw the first presentation on social norms. Wes Perkins did a program in like 1992. And it was very much there was no marketing at this point. It was just, here's some research and trying to like get the information out to students and still testing things. Um, so one is on behaviors. So are people using substances? Are people engaging in protective behaviors? The other form, so this was sort of the advancement of social norms, was attitudes or beliefs. So one of the things might be we did a campaign of what that a large percent of student tobacco users wanted to quit, right? So that was just making sure we had that question because people didn't want to go smoke free because they're like, well, that's impacting smokers' rights. So again, this is like 20 years ago. So we're like, well, let's just ask the smokers, what do they want? Do they want smoke-free places? And surprisingly, maybe most of them did. They supported smoke-free areas because they wanted to quit, and it was a lot easier if the restaurants were smoke-free. And they had to maybe go outside in the cold to smoke. So it's looking at beliefs like, I don't want to get so drunk, my friends have to take care of me, and putting that back out. So it's a way of if you're looking on your campus and going, we do not have a lot of good social norms around behaviors, well, maybe you start with attitudes and beliefs. Another really important part is what's called media pie. Michael Haynes, who is the first one to really take this idea from Perkins and Berkowitz that there are misperceptions and that we can correct them and actually change behavior. So he said, well, let's do this with me. Let's take the ideas from marketing and apply them to health. And so this is kind of our golden rule in doing anything. Is it pie? Is it positive, inclusive, and empowering? And so we mean, is it a positive message? We're not highlighting the negative. Is it inclusive to many different types of students? And is it empowering, which means tell me what to do. Don't just say what not to do. Show me steps I can take myself. So now we're going to move into, so that's kind of my background to just kind of hopefully very light because those are really important concepts. And I think those are some of the areas that people skip over as they're creating social norms messages, whether it's in a marketing campaign or not, because it's really easy to just go, oh, here's a norm, like 80% of students do this, but miss out on all these other things, right? And they just focus on what's the highest percent I can put out there. And that may not be effective. So if you're not familiar with Jeff Linkenbach and the Montana Institute, it's really pretty amazing. It's every summer and they do have a virtual option. I went in 1999 it's really pretty amazing. And it's the idea is sort of the power of the positive. So it's now called Positive Community Norms Process, and they have tons of resources. That's a hyperlink there when you get the slides of using community. So not just campus, but high schools, campaigns with parents. They do billboards out in Montana and a lot of great evaluation. So I highly recommend them as a place to really dive deep. You see, it's a 7-step process. We do not have time for all 7 steps in an hour program. So we are going to highlight these 3 green ones. And we're going to walk in, do a little more of a deep dive for those 3. And as you see, I mentioned with the SPIF, very similar approach. So it fits in again with recognized models. So we're going to start off with message development. I'm going to assume you've done your surveys, you've got your data, and you're like, you know what your outcomes are, who your high risk populations are. Now what? So start, always look for data and match to have misperception rates. To really do a social norms campaign well, you've got to have what is the perception. So look for those misperception rates, but never, 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 never put the misperception in the message because people, there's a lot of research that says if you put a myth, if you do like myth and fact, and you put the myth in the fact, what are they going to remember? The myth, because it was already stuck in their head. So just focus on the truth, not the misperception. Um, Look for like, what do you want to have as a main message? Like, are they students are drinking less than you think? And I'll show you an example of how that plays out in a poster in a moment. And then you can look at smaller ones that kind of support that. So like have a main campaign message, and then what are some of the other supporting messages? And then you can sort of refine that every year. Um, Look at, make sure, here's where I was like, students are so important to this process. I've worked on campuses where it was actually a class project. We had like a health promotion, or we had a public health minor. So students could take a class where they actually created the posters that were used the next semester that actually went up in the bathrooms. So we had them look at the raw data, right? We trained them. We looked at that. They drafted some messages. And so it was a really great way of so it's a little bit slower, but I think the outcome is so much better. Of course, tell the truth. We're going to use, the exact data that came out. And then stakeholder concerns. And stakeholders, for the most part, are your students, but there might be some higher ups that are a little concerned. So, what kind of things do you have to do to address those concerns? And that can be around, well, we're telling people who are underage that some of them are drinking. So, how can you identify what those are? Each campus is going to be a little bit different, and try to come up with like some talking points and address that ahead of time. So, how do you develop a message? Look at all that audience research data. So, you're looking at how much people are drinking, how often they're drinking or using other substance. What are the protective factors? So, those might be using a designated driver, alternating with water if we're talking about alcohol. What are the behaviors or attitudes that are going to reduce their risk? Obviously, we really want to work here with drinking less or using less or less often. But these can be one that you get a lot of buy-in. And again, you've got to really look at your data before you can figure out which of these you're going to use. You want to make sure it's at least 50%. It should go without saying, but I've seen campaigns that are like 40% are doing this. And I'm like, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of math knowledge to go, well, that means 60% are, that means most. So now we're actually going to try this out. I'm going to have a question in a moment. So I'd love, again, if you unmute, that'd be fun, of how you would actually pick a data point. So we're going to look at our data. So here's our hypothetical data. We asked the students, how many alcoholic drinks on average, and we defined what a drink is, do you typically consume at parties and bars, right? Because that gets it a little bit narrower than like Friday night. This is saying when you go to a place with alcohol, how much are you drinking? And we just said, okay, the average response is 4.18. Like that's the typical use, right? And then we also asked a question that asked the last time. So that was a little bit higher. That's like a drink higher the last time. But maybe it was a big party weekend, it was homecoming, who knows? So now we ask a perception question. So how many alcoholic drinks on average do you think the typical student at our college typically consumes? So here's your perception, right? 6.5 and 8.1. So there's a perception gap here. We see 4.1 to 6.5, so a little over 2 drinks, and 5 to 8, so almost 3 drinks. So yes, we've got a perception gap. That means social norms is going to be an approach that will be useful here. All right, so now here's the part where I would love to hear from you. And you can throw it in the chat, or you can unmute. So here's our question, right? Here's our data set. So here's 21% don't drink. Here's 0 or 1, 0, 1, 2, or 2, 0, 1, 2, or 3, all the way up to like 99, which is 100%. Just looking at this data, what's the cutoff point when you're like, I think I would use this to start testing out my social norms message? If folks are putting in the chat, let's see. We do have some chat. Okay, so we have 0 to 3, 0 to 4. People are being shy. All right. Um, here is, hold on. There we go. Oh, it's going the wrong way. There we go. Um, I would suggest 0 to 4 or 0 to 5. Why? Because you got to have at least 50% to consider it a norm. It has to be 50% or higher. So you could go with 0 to 4 because that's 59%. You could go 0 to 5 at 69. Now the perception is 6.5 drinks. So even if you go and you're thinking, wait, but isn't binge drinking like 5 drinks, 4 drinks for women? Isn't this telling people it's okay to binge drink? Here's the thing. The perception is 6.5. So you're telling them if it's 0 to 5, it's still less than they think it is. So, and this means you could say 70%. So this is where you would start. This is where you've really got to get student feedback. So even if you're like, all right, I'm not going to have the students look at the full data set, I'm going to look at this. The test message, I've got 4 test messages that you could use because there's different ways of being truthful with the data. And you need to find out which is going to resonate with students. So message 1, most, UVA, wherever, college students, here's that statistic because students are going to see most and they're going to go, well, yeah, it's like 50.1% because they're not dumb. They're college students. Drink 4, fewer, or none when they go to a bar or party. Here's the same start. Now there's a different way of saying it. Consume between 0 and 4 drinks, right? Sometimes students, and it can vary over time, over population, but students might respond better to a between 0 and 4 and see that 0 really big on a poster. Then you could also look at this. All right, we're going to go with 5. 70% drink 5 or fewer. Now you don't want to round this up to 60, right? You can round to a whole number. I have found, and again, you could test that out on your campus too. Like, do students feel like it's more credible because you had 0.2? Or are they like, that seems like math and I don't want to read it? I mean, you really have to talk with students to find that out. So here's a way that might look. Now, this was when I worked at James Madison University, and social norms marketing was still pretty new. This was 1998. So because it was the first time we'd done social norms marketing on the campus, people are a little more savvy about it now. They've seen it in other places. And we were just targeting first-year students. We wanted to show that a majority were having 3 or fewer, because that was, again, we needed to show for political reasons that it was below binge drinking. Unfortunately, it was still a norm, just barely, but it was. And then remember I said you can use some of those different numbers to help? Well, we wanted to show that, like, gosh, 41% said in a typical week, I'm not drinking at all. Like 40% is a lot. Because if you say 52, that's still making people think, well, most people are drinking and I'm missing out if I'm not. So it's not a majority, but this was a way. And again, we worked with students. So the 3 was really big because they thought it was like much more. And in fact, we were like, we're just being honest. We're showing you the whole data set. And we tested this out and students really appreciated it. They were like, you're treating us like adults. We can look at this. So yeah, 20%, 1 in 5, we're having a lot. But students also went, wow, that's a lot. So it created some discussion. Here's another version. So here's the 0 to 3, the last time they parted. So this is at Virginia Commonwealth University. So just different ways of sharing that data. So again, it seems really easy to like, doesn't this seem like an easy message to come up with, right? But you have to figure out, is it 70%? Is it 7 out of 10? Is it 0 to 3? Is it 0, 1, 2, or 3? So that's where you've got to have. Now, you don't have to do that for every single message, but if you're just getting started, You really need that kind of student feedback to guide your campaign for a couple of years. So looking at design, one of the things that I have a lot of fun with in doing social norms marketing, and if you've got Canva, we did not have Canva back in the day, and when I was first getting started on this. So now almost anybody can create a really cool looking message. It even has like an AI thing now where it can draw crazy animals with like three heads or something. But you want to keep it as simple as you can. One central message. Know your audience, know your students, like what's the style for them. You'll see some examples like Virginia Commonwealth University has a huge art school. So they're an hour away. Both of our campuses have tons of students from in-state, but they're very different cultures. I've shown sample campaigns from this art from an art school, and our very bright students are like, I don't get it. And the art students are like, that's so cool, and you know what it's referencing. Use students as your designers, as your photographers, right? One of the early misses in social commerce marketing was we'll get the data and we'll hire out a graphic design firm. Well, they're not your population, and they might pick stuff that really is not resonating with your students, and it's a lot cheaper to use your students. If we've sort of moved away a little bit from using like live models and students in our work because we're afraid, right, about their own behavior and image. But there are ways to do that if that seems like to be a good fit for your campus. And of course, sign consent and release forms, which is how I get to show these to you. So this one was from that same campaign. You can see there's a similar look. We did learn these posters were too similar in color. And these were not our school colors. We tested that out, and students said, oh, it looks like it's like official, and people, it seemed too official in a way. We eventually took this campaign and changed the colors so it stood out because students said, oh, I saw one, I saw them all. So this woman was my intern. So I worked with her all spring for the campaign that rolled out in August. So I knew because I'd been working with her and training her that she was going to be a good role model. She was not going to be someone who was going to get in trouble with alcohol or for, going beyond these limits that we set. And this was her boyfriend at the time. I have no idea what happened. Again, 1998. So this was from focus groups. So we don't have a norm, but we did test this out. And these were the things that bubbled up in focus groups that students said that they're doing. So here's our norm. 78% refused an offer of alcohol or drugs in the past month. Again, this was when students first got to campus. And they were afraid. They were like, oh, people are going to be drinking. And, if I go out, people are going to expect me to drink. And this kind of normalized, like, it's totally fine. You can go out to a party. Somebody might ask you, hand you a drink, and you can be like, no, it's cool. Most people are doing that. So again, it's a different way of looking at perhaps the kinds of behaviors you might want to collect data on. Sometimes with posters, people want to put everything possible on it. Look at where your posters are going. If they're going in the bathroom and they're going to be up for a month, you can put a ton of information, right? If they're just going to be on posters around the campus, people are just going to, you want to put just a little bit of information because they're not going to have the time to really sit and ponder them. So here's one for Virginia Commonwealth, right? So their tagline, students are healthier than you think. And you can see how they have a variety of health behaviors, not just alcohol, but the 0 to 4 drinks when they go out was a pretty consistent one. And this was a fun little design because this is the city skyline. This is actually some of the residence halls. So this is something that looks really familiar to students, but it makes a really nice, clean, easy to read. You pass this 3 times, you've got that information. Here's one from UVA. So very iconic. Here's our lawn and the rotunda. This is one where we collected data and said, in the month of October, that's when class rings go out. People are doing all these things. They have 0 to 4 drinks during the week, right? And here's our big tagline. 2 out of 3 have 0 to 4 per week. So really clean, eye-catching. This is one that students were going to want to steal. and be like, "Ooh, I want to keep that up in my room because it's a beautiful picture." So, like, how do you work within your culture on your campus? So, some of the elements are you need to make sure the message is believable. Believable to you and believable to students may not be the same thing. You want to make sure you are never using scare tactics or focusing on negative behaviors. And it's really hard sometimes because, especially students, still, I think people are still doing crash cars on occasion or dead days. So they maybe saw a lot of that in high school. So your peer educators who might be working on this have seen some of the negative things. And so it's sort of ingrained and a go-to. And we really have to train them to like constantly positive, inclusive, empowering, use that media pie on everything. So here's an example, again, from UVA. So a campaign we worked on, um, like I think it was 2010. So this is a picture taken of the Blue Ridge. So this is a short drive from our campus. That our director of health promotion went out and took a picture, so we had the copyright on it. We really wanted to be positive. We had a grant around tobacco use. So we've got a great norm, 4 out of 5, choose not to use tobacco, right? Take your breath away naturally. So there's a little bit of like, it does impact your lung capacity. And then we really wanted to focus on that empowering piece, the E in PI, which was you want to quit. And we knew from our research that most smokers do want to quit. We give them 2 options. They can come here to student health. We have a lot of resources, or there's a statewide quit now hotline that gives you personalized assistance in quitting tobacco use. So this is just a really simple campaign. You can put it up on, we had it on the media boards all over the place to try and increase the percent of students that were coming in and getting help in cessation. So I have this one because I just love mice and this makes me laugh. But we want to make sure we're always reaching our high-risk students who are our indicated prevention population, right? Because you can say, well, maybe you should just cut back on the cheese altogether. And they're like, I'd really like to get that cheese right there. Just show me how I can do it and protect myself. So how do we work with those students? Here's a couple of ideas around social norms. So this is actually, it's hard to tell in this, but this is a coaster that we got out to our local restaurants. We had, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of coasters because people do like to collect those at bars. And our focus was on, we had a grant to prevent drunk driving. So we got some great statistics. Of course, we would love that to be 100%, right? So we're in the bar, which is where our high risk students maybe are. And then we also let them know, empowering, right? Number one, are you the DD? You get free sodas all night long. Hey, plan B, my DD started drinking, right? So if you've had too much to drink and you don't have money, like here's what you can do. You can actually call Yellow Cab and you can get it charged to the Dean of Students office, right? We'll bill you later. It's not going to show up if your parents are paying the bill. No questions asked. So we strategized and used a social norm message at the top. These keychains, keychain bottle openers. We actually had some pushback from our funder, which was parents, because they were like, wait, but that's encouraging them to drink. We're like, no, this is where they're drinking anyway. This is putting a safety message right in front of them, right? So and we gave these out for spring break. So knowing students might be going abroad and reminding them one of the best things they can do is keep an eye on their drink. And in fact, the vast majority of students do that. So just some fun things you can do. When we start looking at pilot testing, students, I keep saying, have to be very involved in the process. Focus groups are a great way to do this. Just a reminder, they are educating us. We are not teaching them. We have to keep our mouths shut when they say things like, social norms don't work. I don't care. We should get rid of the statistic. We're like, yeah, it does work, even if you think it doesn't. We're just like, writing it down. So it helps us figure out what students are thinking. It's a great way for actually having your survey reviewed. I've done that a lot where I give them the entire survey and they sit for a while with a red pen and they're like, I don't know what this means, or here's a better way, or here's a question you're not asking that you should be, is a great one. We've gotten really good questions from students because of that. You can also include kind of a quantitative element. They can have a short survey where we have like a media display and they have a little survey for each, of 5 posters and they rate it. And I'll show you an example of that. The big thing people want to do, please avoid this, is don't ask them, well, what do they think is we should be doing to solve, substance misuse? Because it's not a good use of a focus group. These are really specific things that are helpful. So here's an example. When we were first getting started at UVA, we had all these fun examples and we literally have them look at all of these samples we have, right? And rate them. Which do you like best? Which one is your least favorite? We got some demographics like, are you in a fraternity or sorority? Your year, your gender, like just to get some ideas. And that led us, as a result, to go with Who Knew, because we're the Wahoos. So we're called the Who's. So Who Knew became our whole campaign, right? And so this piece on the bottom switches out with different things. So here's an example that you can use in focus groups or in intercept surveys. In intercept surveys, you just have like a clipboard or you've got like an iPad or something with a quick survey. And you just ask people really fast. You can even do it with a QR code. Take this, here's a QR code, here's a flyer. I'll give you this free thing if you just answer some questions, right? And this is based on the health communications book. There's a hyperlink there to it if you're interested. They have tons of great things. But this has really helped us as we are looking at our media to go, okay, it's doing all the things we want it to do. So you can do this in a focus group, or you can just like people stand in line waiting for the dining hall, right? What are they going to do? So this is one of the things, this is one that we used. And so looking at higher risk groups, this was our Halloween campaign. We had a student who drew a superhero for our peer education group. She's got a bottle of water because she's safe. So here's a way you can use it for prevention around a hazardous drinking event. And they had, a tweak on the Beyonce quote, always be yourself unless you can be a superhero, Beyonce. So how do you we had a whole theme of ways to be a superhero with your friends. So here's another one. We'll see if y'all want to unmute or chat. What do you think is wrong with this poster? See if I can see anything in the chat, or you can unmute. All right. In the interest of time, I will let you know. Oh, let's go. I got to move it this way. There we go. So students said, because we had that little survey I just showed you, and then we said, what does this poster say to you? And we did this during summer orientation before we put these up in the fall. And the student says, overall, they were like, oh yeah, you can drink as much as you want and it won't impact your grades. We're like, that is not what it says. We're saying you don't drink so much that it impacts your grades. So yeah, we did not use these at all. The ones we had printed, we threw in the recycling. So this is why it's really important to find out how the message is being received by your students. This is an old poster. So, and again, in the interest of time, here's what's wrong with this one. This one's from UVA. This was my office before I was there. So it's just really shaming and blaming is a lot of it. But okay, first of all, 9.3, that's not a norm. 47%, well, that's not a norm, right? And it's highlighting the negative. We could say 53% of students are drinking 4 or fewer, right? It's a positive. And then it shows the misperception, right? Never, never, never do that. And then, are you conforming? Think before you drink. It's a little shaming, right? That is not positive, inclusive, or empowering. So just to put our own mistakes out there. So the last piece is around the implementation. How do you deliver the message and kind of saturate? So coverage is the percent of the intended audience we can reach. So say you want to reach your fraternity members. So like, what's a way that you can reach a majority of them? What percent do you think you'd want? And saturation is like the quantity. Like, how do you reach them enough times? Because once is not enough. And in the ways that they will accurately remember the message, right? It might be something really funny, but they don't remember the message. They just remember the funny image. So your reach will determine how effective you are. You can have an amazing campaign, that you've tested, they're beautiful, everyone loves them, but then you don't get them out, right? This can be the thing that's really hard to get out. So you got to identify who's your audience. How do you meet them where they are? Often they're on their phones. So how can you get on their phones? Um, do you need the message to look a little different for different audiences? So let's say you're working with your NPHC fraternities versus your IFC fraternities. So you've got some cultural differences there. How are those, if you've got images of people, do they look like your target population? Is it using, students are always like, don't meme. Please don't meme. You just look old. So I hear that from my kids too. But what are some things that seem like more current fonts or whatever? Um, and then what are these complementary messages? So the social media, can you make some small group discussions? Can you incorporate it? Is there an online feedback? And then reinforcement. So can you reward students for knowing your message, like putting it on cups or pencils or stickers? So I'm going to show you some of those as well. So this is a campaign we had with a higher risk drinking event. So the day of the last home football game has, for the past 40 something years, been the fourth year fifth. So drinking a fifth of liquor on the day of the last home football game if you are a fourth year or senior. So we've done many, many campaigns around this. This is one that really incorporated a social norms message. This was actually the wraparound on a cup. So there was a period where cups were very collectible. So if you signed the pledge, you got this nice long sleeve, like heavyweight and a pocket T-shirt remembering this last game of your last year, right? 4 out of 5 fourth years do not even attempt it, much less complete it. So that's pretty strong, right? That's 80%. Not only that, did you get rewarded for not doing the fifth, and we evaluated later and found they were statistically significantly less likely if they pledged compared to not pledging. Then when they wore this shirt, they were magnifying the effect. They were making the positive behavior more visible. And then we had these cups. And so their theme was, we had a lot of students who were blacking out. They didn't remember their last. We're like, it's your last year, your last game. So don't let the pregame erase the last game. We had some issues around graduation several years ago. So we worked with the trustees of that class. We focused on make it a day to remember. You worked so hard, your family's here, right? So here was our statistic. Almost all students use 2 or more protected behaviors. So yes, they're going to be celebrating. Our bars open at 6 a.m. So if that's the case, and that's not going to change, what are some things you can do? Now, along with that, we have a free breakfast. You get breakfast burritos because we have a university-owned property in the middle of all the bars. So dining services provides that. So there's a lot of things. It's just reminding them like, hey, here's the things to do so you have a good event. So kind of in wrapping up, if when you're incorporating messages, I would really encourage you to have like an advisory board. But I do the training, like do a version of this, do some training on what social norms marketing is so that your faculty, staff, and your student leaders are making informed feedback and helping you with this board. Maybe get a teaching guide so that if you want to have small group discussions around this in academic classes, that's a possibility. Make it easy for faculty to incorporate some of these ideas. Train your peer educators, make that part of their formal training to understand. So as they're creating messages, they've got this information, they're checking each other. Include normative messages in their programs. Pretty much look through all the brochures and flyers that you have. Can you add a social norm? Do you need to flip something that's kind of negative? And then looking at your social media campaigns. And most of us don't have huge reach in our social media campaigns. So like partner with athletics, partner with the president's office, with your mascot to increase your reach. A few other ideas. You can also use this in bystander engagement training. So this is the Step Up bystander intervention program, which I've worked with. And since the very beginning, we've asked these 2 questions. It's my responsibility to intervene, and most fill in the blank of your school. And we define that 51% or more believe it's their responsibility. Historically, there's a big gap. Everyone says, oh, it's my responsibility. But most people don't care. So we can bring that misperception to light and have them talk about it. Because if I think I'm bothered, but no one else is, and I'm responsible, but no one else was, it's not, I'm going to be less likely to intervene when I see a problem. So, a few of the limitations, because I want to talk about how wonderful it is without giving a few of these cautions. Nothing's a silver bullet. When social norms marketing first came on the scene, people were like, this is all we have to do. And we're like, we still have to warn students, right? There are consequences of hazardous behavior. I'm a huge fan of social norms marketing. We know it works when well done with enough saturation, with enough student engagement, but we can't just paint a rosy picture of everything without saying, hey, as Jeff Linkenbach says, danger, road out ahead, right? We can say stay on this road, but we also need to say this path, you know, has some challenges. So to be aware, that process is pretty time intensive. It's well worth it, but um, it does take some time. You've really got to make sure your stakeholders, your peer leaders, I will say police sometimes too, because they're seeing all the problems, right? Um, they're thinking students are drinking all the time. And we're like, actually, you are seeing the subpopulation. It makes it seem like a lot. So they might be putting out mixed messages. So how can you minimize that risk? Um, Whenever you can get students talking about this, my favorite thing is to present some of this data to a student group, to a class, and then be like, all right, tear it apart. And I can answer questions. And sometimes I don't have the answer. And I'm like, that is awesome. You're making me smarter because now I have to go research that too. But thank you. Because they'll want to know, like, how was the survey done? Like, give them opportunities to question. Um, and the more local you can make the data, the better. So, for example, in a fraternity program, we did one that we surveyed all of our fraternities and we found there were really real differences, right? But what they cared about was, or actually, my athlete one is better. So, student athletes were a Division I school. They didn't really care what the typical student at UVA was doing because they're like, well, we're different, and they are. What they cared about was how do we compare to Division I athletes at other schools? And the NCAA has some of that national data. So we could share our data. And then if you don't have, campus specific data for our athletes, go to NCAA data and you can look at it for D1, D2, D3. That was salient. That was important to them. That was their reference group. That's who they were looking up to. So with that, here are all my references and resources. Again, I'm eternally grateful for all of these people. Alan Berkowitz, Michael Haynes, Wes Perkins, Jeff Lingenbach are all just fabulous. And please check out all of these wonderful resources. And with that, I will stop sharing. And if people have any questions or had stuff in the Q&A, I would be happy to answer them. Sorry, I gave you like 1 minute.
No, you're good. Feel free, anyone, to either unmute or throw those in the chat for Susie to follow up with.
I always joke, I have a degree in counseling, so I'm really good with silence. And I'm like, I know it takes a while to type, but I really don't mind. And I'll also stay on afterwards. So do we want to stop the recording now? We can do that.
Yes, let's go ahead and do.
Sometimes people don't. And yes,